week 11 of the protests against the controversial judicial reforms, these protests are getting bigger and more frequent. But the government is not flinching. Today, thousands of Israelis have taken to the streets for a day of paralysis, blocking highways and entrances to houses of coalition members. But whilst the judicial reforms, which critics say will weaken the Supreme Court, is going full steam ahead, the government has also pushed through other controversial legislation just in time before the Knesset's Passover break. This includes reclaiming 4 West Bank settlements from the 2005 disengagement plan and a law shielding Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu from court-ordered recusal. But it's been a tricky week for the Prime Minister on the diplomatic front, with Israel's ambassador to the US, Michael Herzog, getting summoned to the State Department because of the settlements law, and reports that the UAE and Jordan are looking at reducing diplomacy for Israel. But with attacks against him from both inside and outside Israel, will Netanyahu budge? Is there a world in which Netanyahu can pass these reforms and maintain diplomatic relations he spent the last decade working on? With an estimated 5 to 10% of Israel's population attending protests twice a week and the government pressing forwards, have they run out of steam? What's next for Israel's judicial reforms?
Okay, gentlemen, let's get to it. What's next for Israel's judicial reforms? As always, we begin with our quick fire round, 30 seconds each. We'll have your initial stance on the matter, and we'll pick it up from there. So, Mr. Shai Bazak, please take the lead.
Seems like the government is running full steam ahead, as you just mentioned. The protesters are also increasing their protest, and a solution doesn't seems to be in the horizon. The implementation and the implication of this is still in the dark, but it's not a very happy day for the state of Israel.
No, not happy, that's for certain. Former Israeli lawmaker, Professor Yossi Yona, your take?
Yeah, well, one cannot be, we cannot be unimpressed by the display of civil society, tenacity and resolve of the protesters. It is, at the end of the day, now we're fighting over democracy, and this is a beautiful manifestation of democratic zeal shown by the protesters.
Okay, a former lawmaker, Yehuda Glick, last but not least, beg to differ maybe?
Thank God we are living in a democratic state and people have a right to demonstrate, and that's the way it should be. At the same time, we have to be very careful that the demonstrators don't cross the very thin line from demonstrating to anarchy. As long as we're a demonstration, that's fine. As long as there's a democratic government that's implementing its decisions, that's wonderful.
Okay, and on that note, gentlemen, we'll dive in further into the protests, their scope, their scale, their efficiency in a bit, but I do want us to begin, and of course, let's feel free to interact from this point onwards. Let's begin with perhaps the main question, politically speaking. At this point in time, does Benjamin Netanyahu have more to lose from backing down than from pushing through? Shai Bazak?
I'm not sure how he thinks this day, because some say that he has his personal issues on his mind, but others say that he is the only legislator today who understands the capacity and the influence of this revolution on the international relationship of Israel, on its economy, its security, and its inner social effects. So if he is a leader, as many people sees, I would say that if he's going to stop it in this point and call for discussion amongst all the sides of the political arena and the civil arena in Israel here, and come together to a solution who gives some kind of correction to the judicial system, which, like every other system, needs correction and adaptation from time to time, that's going to be a very good step. If he insists to go forward, I sadly believe that the results for the state of Israel, which will become clear very soon, unfortunately, in the economic, international, security, and others arena, will be so severe that he will be remembered as the one who led the state of Israel to this direction. I really hope I'm mistaken here, but it's a big fear. If I would be him, I would concentrate on bringing a big consensus around this reform than to keep running it by himself.
Okay, Yehuda Glick, what can Netanyahu tell his supporters if he was indeed to back down?
I do hope he will not back down. We've seen in the last week that Netanyahu's side, the coalition, have softened their bills of legislation. And in spite of that, we see the side of the protesters are not willing to budge, not even 1 millimeter, to any kind of dialogue. They have no trust in Netanyahu. Even if Netanyahu today would offer their opinion, they would go against him because they don't trust the man. And they don't trust the democratic system in Israel that voted for a legitimate government. And therefore, I personally as can say that a leadership is a person who knows that he's going to pay a price for the short term, but he believes in what he's doing, and he knows he's doing what's right for the country to make this country a more democratic country. And therefore, I think that the government has done the right thing to soften the legislation. And at that point, it's time for the other side to make a few steps closer and to calm down the violence in the streets before it leads to something that nobody of us really wants to reach.
Professor Yona, maybe a step forward from the opposition standpoint is needed?
Yeah, well, first, as to what my friend Yehuda was saying, I don't think that the intent is really like strengthening Israeli democracy. And just, one point, in this regard, the canceling the ability of Supreme Court for a judicial review, that is not the strengthening democracy, that going back, that, just Israel would not be able to be anymore in any longer liberal democracy without the ability of the Supreme Court to conduct a judicial review on legislations or laws passed by the parliament. Now, this is one point. Another point that I would like to stress is that it seems that maybe Netanyahu himself is entrenched because he has no choice but being entrenched in his resolve to go on, to go ahead with this judicial reform, revolution, what have you, because giving in might bring the downfall of his government. We have to remember that Netanyahu has become a captive to the ultra-right wings parties of his coalition government. And I think that when we're taking into account this kind of partners, he doesn't have much of a leeway.
Okay, and on that note, gentlemen, you've all alluded to the fact that the international community no longer diplomatic, if you will, in its criticism, not just over the judicial debate, but also the disengagement from the disengagement, and adding a different fuel to this existing fire this week. Transport Minister Miri Regev, let's take a quick listen and pick it up from there.
I was in Dubai. Not that I will go back there. I don't like this place. But it's just awesome to see what roads they've built in 6 years.
So, gentlemen, question being, is Netanyahu's government members undoing his decade of impressive diplomacy, Yehuda Glick?
Well, I can say that I support every single sentence said by every single politician. That's what happens when you have a diverse political government. I also, by the way, would have liked to see a government with a more wider spectrum of the Israeli society. Unfortunately, half of the Israeli government, half of the Israeli political arena has decided to ban Netanyahu, and then they're blaming him. Why does he make coalitions with the extreme right? If the other parties were really willing to join in with the party that again and again gains the majority of the votes in Israel, we would have a more moderate government. But you can't not refuse to go into the government and ban Netanyahu and then blame him for making a government with the far extreme right. I would definitely hope that we concentrate on what the government does and not what every single politician says. And I think if we give the government some time, we will see that the government can have a high potential to succeed.
Well, I do want to stay on the international arena for a bit longer. Shai Bazak, do you find calls on behalf of opposition leaders and former politicians on foreign leaders to turn their backs against Netanyahu legitimate?
I believe that we have to keep as much as we can the internal debate that we have inside Israel and not to go to the international arena. But it's going to be naive to think that in the world of today, which 1 second after a leader or a politician says something, his words, if they are important enough or provocative enough, are spread all around the internet, and in 1 minute the White House can read them, and same thing goes to number 10 in London or in the Chancellor Bureau in Berlin. Yeah. So it's not about our debate here in Israel. It's not the old day that we could kept it among ourselves. I would not call foreign leaders to do anything about Israel. I think they are clever enough and unfortunately knowledgeable enough to understand and to see by themselves what's going on here and to make their own decisions. I wouldn't support it, but I'm not surprising that the international effects are running so fast and burning so many good relationships that we have among our friends around the world.
But Professor Yona, can you imagine a right-wing lawmaker calling on a foreign leader not to meet a left-wing prime minister?
Look, I mean, we're talking about as if, we're asking for foreign leaders to interfere with our domestic affairs and such things. Well, all parties do that. Israel is interfering with the domestic affairs of other countries interfering in domestic affairs of our own and stuff like that. So I don't think that it is like a fully, like a strange thing that we actually are witnessing. But let me relate to things that have been said now by our colleagues here. First, well, unfortunately, some of our politicians lack finesse or sophistication, and just to throw the kind of really hilarious statement into the air, and that definitely undermining or damaging our status vis-a-vis world leaders and in general vis-a-vis the world. And now this is one point that I want to stress. Another point that Israel is really losing. Israel is losing in terms of its standing in the world. And now, look, we are stressing very often the very fact that we share common values with Western countries and many other countries. Yeah. So you cannot, on one hand, to say yes, we belong in this kind of international community. Yes. And then act in such a way that you break away from this community.
Professor Yona, we will put a stop right here because we do need to take a break, but we will have so much more to discuss once we're back. Professor Yossi Yona, Yehuda Glick, and Shai Bazak, you're all staying with us. A few minutes, and we're back. Welcome back to the summit. Still with us, Yehuda Glick, Professor Yossi Yona, Shai Bazak. Thank you, gentlemen, for staying with us. We're also staying, of course, on topic. But before we get back to our conversation, the protest not fading away, as we've been thoroughly discussing. But is the day of paralysis essentially paralyzing the prospects of any compromise? I-24 News senior correspondent Jonathan Regev is at one of the main rallies today at the ultra-Orthodox city of Bnei Brak. Let's take a listen.
Another week of protests, Eli. Again, tens of thousands of people on the streets here in Tel Aviv, the main protests, but also demonstrations all around the country. The protesters clearly are making their message be heard, but the question is, how much effect does it have? Eventually, we have to say that the decisions regarding this judicial reform will be decided in the Knesset, and in the Knesset, the Israeli parliament, the current coalition has a 64-seat majority. We do know that it was, if it were as far as Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is considered, he would be interested to find some kind of a compromise, but when he depends in his coalition on so many far-right elements, and even within his own Likud party, many supporters of the reform, it is not clear how much room for compromise he has. On one hand, we have those parliament members dragging Netanyahu to the direction of that judicial reform or revolution, whatever you choose to call it. On the other hand, every week we see tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people on the streets. So this is a main question. At least for now, it does not have a clear answer. Jonathan Regev, I-24 News.
Yes, our Jonathan Regev. Evidently, it's the Ayalon highway, blocking the Ayalon highway with protesters, not in the city of Bnei Brak, but it did happen there as well. Gentlemen, another quick fire round. Have the protests gone as far as they can? Let's begin with you, Yehuda Glick.
Well, the very fact that there were major demonstrations in Bnei Brak, which is an ultra-Orthodox city, shows us that the demonstrations have far long time ago left the topic of the judicial system, and we're talking about a very big divide in the state of Israel. On the one hand, that's very worrying. On the other hand, maybe it's time for us to talk to each other, put the topics on the table, what disturbs us, and talk to each other in a dialogue, face to face.
It seems that we disturb us. Professor Yossi Yona, have protests gone as far as they can?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, a democratic society should be able to contain these demonstrations, and demonstration usually, you know, would push it to as far as they can, and democratic regime should be able to contain it. So this is a comment I would like to make. Another thing is vis-a-vis what my friend Yehuda just said, vis-a-vis the Haredim. Well, there is a problem there, because if there would be some kind of revolution, a judicial revolution, not securing the value or the principle of equality, and we know very well that the Haredim are very much interested of not having this kind of principle in Israeli what called liberal democracy that would serve them. So in that sense, you know, going there just to telling them, look, guys, we are committed to the principle of equality, and you should be as well committed to that.
Okay, Professor Yona, Shai Bazak, your 30 seconds.
Protests can go much further than this. Of course, I hope it will not come to violence, but just to mention a few steps that can happen if this reform will continue in its way. You know, member of Knesset can resign or just leave the parliament. The judges can resign. Diplomats can protest. There are so many things that can happen. We see already some effect on the army, on the banks, economists. So who knows where it's going to end.
Yes, and on that note, gentlemen, we encourage, of course, your kind interaction, but I think that it's time to ask the question, maybe demonstrations are becoming counter-conducive, disrupting the life of quote-unquote ordinary innocent civilians, alienating the public, and also maybe they're getting a bit too reckless. Our fatalities just a matter of time. Shai Bazak.
When you talk to mass people who comes voluntarily, and I have many friends from the right, from the left, from the center who comes to these demonstrations, you can expect extremists on the sides to do violent things or to do things that most of the protesters do not agree with, and I think they are damaging the main purpose of this demonstration. So I hope they will continue to whoever support them in a peaceful way, but they have absolutely effect on the legislators in Jerusalem. And I think that's what the protesters want to achieve, to be heard. Okay. And they have nothing else to do, by the way, when the majority of the coalition in the parliament are continuing their way and the right to do so. Okay. The only way that's left to the people in the street is to protest. I believe they will continue to do so.
Okay. Yehuda Glick, you wanted to chime in.
Yeah, I want to first agree with what my friend Professor Yonah said a few moments ago, and that is really democracy should be able to contain demonstrations, people who are determined to say what they have to say, and politicians should listen to them. At the same time, I think the protesters should be very, very, very careful, because For instance, I want to compliment member of Knesset Chili Tropper, who yesterday signed members of Knesset against ruining the upcoming Memorial Day, which we are facing. We're facing now a month and a half of holiday, the Passover, of the day we commemorate the Holocaust, and the day we commemorate the Israeli soldiers, the day of independence. And I think the mass population would like to be able to celebrate these things without being interfered. And I think the protesters have to be, on the one hand, be very careful. Of course, like Shai Bazak said, not crossing a line of something that's illegal or doing anything violent, but at the same time should not lose the tolerance of the civilians in this country, because then their protest will only cause more damage to their intentions.
Yeah, Professor Yona, what do you think?
Well, it seems that we are really in a dire straits here. That we see that kind of culmination, or that we that the demonstration is getting, I wouldn't say more violent, but more vociferous, if you wish, because the government goes ahead with the whatever it is, a revolution or reform, and it doesn't seem that it takes seriously this authentic, I would say, authentic voice of a large portion of the Israeli society. So we are locked here, you know, this kind of, I don't know whether is it a chicken game, you know, that who's going to blink first, something like that, to blink first, something like that. But I don't know. I have to say that, you know, it pains me to see that there is no kind of a mutual willingness to meet each other half the way. This is what I think it is needed, and maybe we are lacking the kind of leadership on both sides, probably, that would enable to bring both sides and begin to talk and to see what kind of compromise we can get out of these dire straits in which we are locked in.
Yeah, gentlemen, we are nearing the end of our discussion today. Simply put, should we head to a national referendum? Shai Bazak, briefly, if you can.
I don't think a national referendum is something that's good to do at all. In general, I oppose it because to simplify the complicated questions to a yes or no in a referendum is almost absolutely impossible. On this one, what you're going to bring to a referendum? A full paper of one or the second kind of plan, the president plan and the government plan. I don't think the politician will agree to something like that. Yeah. They will ask yes or no on something that is so complex. I don't think referendum here is going to do any good. But I wonder why, you know, we have so many things that trouble us now, security and the economy.
Maybe a referendum is needed on whether the two Israels want to stay together. Shai Bazak, Professor Yossi Yona, Yehuda Glick, thank you so very much for your time and insight. We appreciate it.